Lena sets down her toast, and then her hand is at my waist, sliding under the hem of the ivory shirt, warm palm against bare skin, staying. My hands find the counter edge. My throat moves without making a sound. My entire spine registers the warmth of that hand as something it has been waiting for with a patience it did not discuss with the rest of me. She does not move the hand. She says, "I've been deciding whether to do that for 4 nights. Not a question. Not an apology. A statement of duration offered with the precision of someone who measures load-bearing intervals for a living. If you want to hear uncensored too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe." The house rule, when I arrived on a Sunday afternoon with 1 bag and a camera case, and the particular loose-limbed relief of a person who has not had to be anywhere specific for 3 weeks, was simple. Juno had written it out on a note card and left it on the kitchen table beside a bowl of apples and a half-finished bottle of olive oil that suggested she had packed in stages and the final stage had happened in some haste. "No obligation," the card read, in Juno's angular hand. "No agenda. Use the kitchen freely. The East Wing is Lena's. She's doing her reduced schedule thing. She knows you're coming. She won't bother you. Don't bother her unless she's already in a room you're also in. She'll tell you if she needs anything." I had read the card twice, eaten an apple standing at the counter, and thought about the East Wing with the specific quality of attention I usually reserve for a composition I am not yet ready to approach. A quality of deliberate peripheral awareness, patient, not pressing. I had met Lena twice. Once at Juno's 30th birthday, briefly in a garden full of people, where she had arrived late in a navy blazer and spoken to perhaps 4 people, and I had watched her, from across the lawn, hold a conversation with Juno's neighbor, a retired civil engineer with a habit of testing whoever he was talking to, and I had watched her answer his tests so directly and with such uninterested precision that he had eventually stopped testing and started listening, which he was not known to do. The second time was at Juno's flat 2 Christmases ago, a dinner that had run long, and Lena had sat at the opposite end of the table and eaten her meal and listened to the room with the particular stillness of someone who finds rooms manageable when she can see the whole of them at once. She had caught me watching her once, across the debris of the main course, and the look she had given me was not unfriendly and not warm. It was the look of someone who had noticed the watching and had decided it did not require a response. I had looked away first. She was, Juno had told me over the years, the most competent person Juno had ever personally known, and also the most contained. And the pregnancy, planned, deliberate, solo, 30 weeks along and accelerating, was a decision Lena had described to Juno in the same register she used to describe a structural decision. Here are the load requirements, here is the timeline, here are the factors I have assessed. She had not asked Juno's opinion. She had stated the decision and then asked if Juno was free for dinner on Thursday. I had thought, driving to the farmhouse from the station, that I would probably not see her much. The East Wing was its own geography. I had a week of nowhere to be and a hard drive that needed organizing and the specific formless luxury of a person between one demanding thing and the next. I did not require company. I was not, as Juno frequently observed, someone who required company. The East Wing rule lasted 2 days. On the evening of the 3rd day, I came downstairs at just past midnight because I had made the mistake of looking at my inbox at 11 and had subsequently been unable to lie still, and the kitchen was dark except for the pendant above the counter, warm, honey-toned, making a circle of light that left the rest of the room in full darkness. And Lena was at the counter. She was standing at the toaster in a dark, oversized linen shirt and dark, soft trousers, and her hair was down, which I had not seen before, jet black and slightly disordered, the way hair gets when sleep has been attempted and not quite achieved. And there was the particular quality to her posture that I recognized without yet having a name for. Precise, economical, doing the specific task in front of her and not the 17 surrounding tasks simultaneously. The toaster clicked. She retrieved the toast with the focused attention of someone managing a deliverable. She heard me come in. She turned. She looked at me for a moment in the way she had looked at me across Juno's dinner table, noting, assessing, deciding it did not require a response. And then she said, "Tea?" I said yes. She made it without asking how I took it, which should have been a guess, but was not. It was the right temperature, the right strength, the right amount of milk. I did not ask how she knew. Not. I sat on one of the two stools at the counter and wrapped my hands around the mug, and she sat on the adjacent stool and ate her toast, and we talked about nothing for an hour. Or not nothing exactly. We talked about the farmhouse, which had been in Juno's family for 2 generations and had the specific architectural history of a house that had been added to without a plan, East Wing appearing in the 70s, the utility corridor in the 90s, the structural question of the north wall, which, Lena noted, looking at the ceiling above the counter with a slight narrowing of her eyes, had probably not been assessed since the extension was put in and had a deflection pattern in the plaster that suggested something worth keeping an eye on. I looked at the ceiling. I could not see the deflection pattern. I believed it was there. We talked about Juno, her itinerary, the conference in Oslo, the particular quality of Juno's relationship with schedules, which Lena described as aspirational, in a tone that was the first time I heard her be dry about something, and the first time I found myself smiling without managing to. We talked briefly about the pregnancy. Not at length, not with the performed curiosity that I could see Lena had been managing from other people for months, but practically, in passing, the way you mention the weather when the weather is relevant. She was 30 weeks. The reduced schedule had been her own decision, not her firm's. The architecture of the plan was sound. She said this, the architecture of the plan is sound, without irony, as an assessment. And I noted it with the same peripheral attention I had been giving everything else about her, and said nothing. I walked back to my room at 1:15 and lay on my back in the dark and looked at the ceiling for a very specific and diagnostic period of time. Night 4 was the same pendant light making the same warm circle in the full dark kitchen, the same stools. She was there before me both nights, which I understood after the second one to mean she was always there, the East Wing not providing at midnight what the kitchen counter apparently provided. She made tea when she heard me on the stairs. I had stopped being surprised by the temperature and the strength. She had stopped, I noticed, eating only one piece of toast. There was a specific geometry to the two stools, by night 4, that was not the same as the geometry had been on night 3. On night 3, I had sat at my stool with the cautious spatial intelligence of a guest in a borrowed house. A foot or more of counter between us, both of us facing forward, parallel, the arrangement of people who are sharing a space, but not yet sharing anything inside it. By night 4, the distance had closed without either of us having moved overtly to close it. My left knee was perhaps 4 inches from her right one. Her shoulder was perhaps 6 inches from mine. The proximity had a quality of patience to it, an incremental declaration of position that I was aware of registering and filing under the wrong category. I was aware, specifically, that I was filing it wrong. The body is not a careful taxonomist. On night 5, the mug is already on the right-hand hook when I come into the kitchen. I stop at the bottom of the stairs and see it there. The specific mug I have used 4 nights running, white with a chip at the base. Juno's old pottery class attempt from university. Hanging on the right-hand hook, which is the hook closest to the counter stool I have been sitting on. And the toast plate on the counter already has 2 pieces on it, and Lena is sitting on her stool with her hands around her mug, not eating yet, looking at the counter surface. I stand in the doorway for a moment. The pendant light is on. The rest of the kitchen is dark. She has her hair down again, disordered in the same way, the same evidence of sleep attempted and set aside, and the dark linen shirt is open at the collar in a way that is the ease of a 3rd trimester and nothing else. And the dark, soft trousers pool slightly at her feet. And she is 30 weeks and present in a room, and the mug is on the right-hand hook, and neither of us has spoken yet. I come in. I take the mug off the hook and fill it from the kettle that is already hot, and I sit on my stool and I do not comment on the toast or the mug or the hook or any of the domestic architecture that has accumulated in 5 evenings of supposedly incidental midnight company. She does not comment either. The farmhouse is entirely silent except for the refrigerator cycling in its low register and the occasional sound of her weight redistributing on the stool. A small, controlled adjustment, the 30-week weight finding its new arrangement, and my own breath, which I am keeping even. The toast is on the plate. Neither of us is eating it yet. She is in her thinking through a load posture. I have learned this over 5 nights, the hands around the mug, the eyes on the counter surface, the particular quality of stillness that is not absence, but concentration turned inward. I have learned to sit inside it without disturbing it, which is a skill I have from years of waiting for light to do what it was going to do, regardless of whether I was patient. I sit inside her thinking posture and drink my tea and do not require anything. The 3 inches between my left knee and her right one are the most attended 3 inches in the room, not attended dramatically, not attended in the way of a person who has admitted anything, but attended in the way that the body attends a specific location when it has been cataloging the incremental decrease of a distance over 5 evenings and has formed, without consultation, a strong opinion about what the ideal distance would be. 3 inches. The distance has a specific quality of temperature, which is to say there is warmth at that specific distance that is not my warmth alone. She shifts on the stool. The small adjustment sound, involuntary, the weight redistributing, the 30-week reality asserting itself. And then immediately, the control reasserting. She stills. She stills with the precision of someone who has been controlling small, involuntary sounds for several months and has become efficient at it. Then she looks at me. Not the assessing look, not the look from across Juno's dinner table. This look has a different quality. The look of someone who has been controlling something in front of a specific person for 5 nights and is aware, looking at that person now, that the control has a cost she has been deciding whether to pay in private. She looks at me with the expression of someone who is tired of controlling small sounds in front of a person who has been kind about them for 5 consecutive nights. I look back. I do not say anything. There is nothing to say that would be equal to this moment. There's only the pendant light and the counter and the 2 pieces of toast and the 3 inches between us and the refrigerator cycling in the dark. She looks back at the counter. I pick up my toast. The hour carries itself the way the previous 4 hours on the previous 4 nights have carried themselves. In the particular medium of 2 people who have stopped needing to perform the mechanics of conversation and have arrived at the quieter, more honest territory of simply being in the same room with the same light and the same warmth. We talk. Not about nothing. Not anymore. By night 5, the nothing has become something. But in the layered, associative way of people who have been slowly learning the grammar of each other's minds without naming the process. She talks about load distribution. Not abstractly, specifically a project she has been reviewing on reduced hours, a residential development in the Northeast where the structural assessment had been done competently but not precisely, and precision is not optional, and she has been working through the revised calculations in the East Wing in the afternoons, and there is a specific question about a moment connection that she is not yet satisfied with. I listen. I ask questions that are probably not technically informed, but which are, she says once, looking at me with a slight and involuntary adjustment of her expression. A softening at the corners, barely there, the kind of thing I have been cataloging, structurally sound. I tell her about the commission I finished 6 months ago. 6 weeks in the Outer Hebrides, a documentary project on the relationship between fishing communities and winter light, which sounds romantic and was partly romantic and was mostly very cold and involved a lot of waiting in rain gear for the quality of light to justify the waiting. She listens in the way she does everything, fully, without performing the listening. She asks about the waiting. Not the photography, the waiting specifically, what I do in it. I say, exist in the space without requiring it to become anything yet. She looks at me for a moment, then she looks at the counter. She says, I'm not good at that. She says it plainly, without self-criticism, as an assessment. The way she says the architecture of the plan is sound. As a fact, neutral, received. I say, you're better at it than you think. She looks at me again. The soft adjustment at the corners of her expression, slightly more visible than before. You've been watching me for 5 nights, she says. You've been here, I say. This lands somewhere. I can see it land, a small thing, a contained landing, but registered. She looks back at the counter. She brings her mug to her mouth. The farmhouse silence reasserts itself around the statement we have just allowed into the air, and neither of us discusses it, and neither of us leaves. The 3 inches between us do not change. They stay 3 inches for the rest of this particular night, and I walk back to my room at 1:40 and lie in the dark and note, with the unglamorous precision of a person who has been filing things in the wrong categories for 5 days, that the categories are becoming structurally unsound. The next evening, night 5, which is tonight, which is already in progress, carries forward the accumulated weight of the previous 4. It is past 12:30 now. The toast has been eaten. The tea is at the bottom of the 2nd cup. The conversation has ranged and settled, and the range has narrowed over the hour to the specific radius of the counter and the pendant light and the 2 of us on our stools, knees perhaps 2.5 inches apart, shoulders perhaps 4. She's talking about the moment connection, the specific question in the Northeast project, and her hands are moving slightly as she talks through the load path, a specific and efficient gesture that is the closest thing to expressive I have seen from her hands. and I am watching them with the same peripheral quality of attention I give everything about her, and I am aware of the warmth at 2.5 inches, and I am aware of the sound of the farmhouse silence around her voice, and I am aware of the specific scent she carries at this proximity. Cedar and something cool, like linen left in a clean room, and underneath both of those things, something warmer, skin warm. 30 weeks warm, close room at midnight warm. And I'm not managing any of this information into a useful category because there is no useful category. She stops. Mid-sentence, about the moment connection. She stops. She makes the small adjustment sound on the stool, the weight redistributing. She tries to control it immediately, as she always does, and then she stops controlling it, and the stop is a visible decision. She sits with the sound in the air between us. My left hand moves before my mind has agreed to the movement. I put it on her forearm, not her hand, not her shoulder. Her forearm through the linen sleeve, just resting. My palm against the linen, which is soft from washing and warm from the skin beneath it. Not hot, not cold, the specific warmth of someone who has been sitting in the same warm circle of light for over an hour. I set my hand there and say nothing. Nothing is the correct thing to say. I learned this from Juno about Lena years ago, before I had any reason to need it. Lena does not want responses to the small, involuntary sounds. She wants their presence acknowledged without being made to perform the acknowledgement. I put my hand on her forearm and say nothing. The farmhouse is entirely silent. The refrigerator is not cycling. There is no traffic. There is no wind. There is the pendant light making its warm circle, and outside it, the full dark of a rural night that is genuinely, completely dark, the kind of dark the city never produces. And there are the two of us in the warm circle, and my palm on her linen sleeve, and neither of us moving. Her breathing shifts. I hear it. It is not a dramatic shift, not the shift of someone who has been surprised or startled. It is the shift of someone whose controlled register, the one she has been maintaining with the quiet efficiency of a person who maintains controlled registers as a professional competency, has allowed one breath out of its prescribed containment. One breath, slightly longer, slightly less structured. The farmhouse silence is so complete that I can hear the precise quality of the difference. And the quality of the difference does something in my sternum that I catalog and file, incorrectly, under noted. She does not move her arm. She looks down at my hand on her sleeve for a moment. The pendant light catches the side of her face from this angle. The jaw, the line of her cheek, the slight disorder of the black hair falling forward. And she is looking at my hand on her linen sleeve with an expression that is not quite neutral and is not quite anything else. And I wait inside this moment the way I wait inside a composition when the light is about to do what it is going to do. Then she puts her other hand over mine, not gripping, not pressing, covering her palm over the back of my hand, warm, still. The gesture of someone placing a weight rather than applying one. Her hand over mine on her forearm, and she holds it there. The hold goes on for 1 second, 2, 3, long past the length of comfort, long past the length of anything this gesture might credibly be called, other than what it is. Her hand over mine, both still, the farmhouse silent around us, the dark beyond the pendant, light, total, and complete. The hold is involuntary in the way that the most deliberate things are involuntary. I do not move my hand. She does not move hers. The 3 breaths she takes while her hand is over mine are the most carefully monitored 3 breaths I have ever counted. Because I am counting without meaning to. Because my body has taken on the counting as a task it considers essential to its continued operation. Her thumb moves once, slightly, across the back of my hand. One movement. Not a stroke. Too slow for a stroke. Too deliberate. The pad of her thumb moving perhaps an inch and stopping. One movement. Held. Then she lifts her hand. She wraps both hands around her mug. She looks at the counter. The quality of the kitchen air in the moment after her hand lifts is a physical event in the back of my neck. Not absence exactly, more like the specific temperature that remains after a warm surface has been removed from contact, the skin still holding the memory of the warmth while the warmth is no longer present, and the skin not yet sure how to reclassify the location. I keep my hand on her forearm for one more moment, then I lift it. I wrap my own hands around my own mug. We sit in the silence. The refrigerator begins to cycle again. The sound of it is enormous. She says after a while, "How's the hard drive coming?" I say, "Slowly." she says. Good. And then, slow is usually more honest. I look at her. She is looking at the counter. The very corners of her mouth have made the small, contained adjustment that is, I have learned over 5 nights, as close to a smile as she generally permits in the waking hours of a farmhouse kitchen at past 1 in the morning. I look back at my mug. Good, I think. Slow is usually more honest. I note this in the same location where I have been noting everything else she has said over 5 nights. In the growing archive of Lena-specific observations that I have been maintaining in the region of my chest, that is not the analytical mind, but the other thing, the one that operates without my direct supervision, and I do not examine the archive directly. I walk back to my room at 2:15. I lie in the dark, and I think about the specific warmth of her hand over mine on her forearm. The covering quality of it, not gripping. The duration of it, past the length of comfort. The one movement of her thumb. I think about this with a patience I have no particular interest in sustaining. Night 5, which is tonight, which is not over. I am awake at 12:20, and I am already in the kitchen, and the mug is on the right-hand hook, and the toast is on the plate in 2 pieces, and she is on her stool with her hands around her mug. And the 3 inches between us are not 3 inches anymore. 2, perhaps, the distance that has been decreasing by incremental steps, arriving at a new position, and the hour has already been running for 50 minutes, and we are past the toast and past the second cup and into the territory that has no specific name, the territory that exists in borrowed farmhouse kitchens at 12:30 on night 5 of 7 when the week is running out of days. She says, I've been thinking about what I'm going to be good at alone and what I'm going to need to ask for. She says it to the counter in the same tone she uses for load assessments. A structural inventory. She's cataloging the load requirements of the months ahead, the 30 weeks becoming 40, the 40 becoming the first weeks becoming the rest of it, with the precision that she applies to everything. And she is doing it in front of me, which is the first time I have seen her do this kind of inventory in front of a person, rather than behind the closed architecture of the East Wing. The pendant light is warm, and everything beyond it is dark, and the farmhouse is entirely silent, and I am sitting 2 inches from her on a stool in a borrowed ivory linen shirt with nothing underneath it but the fact of midnight. And I listen. She says, I've been thinking about it since night 3. The kitchen air shifts slightly with this. Night 3 is a specific temporal marker. It is the night I came downstairs with my inbox problem and found her at the toaster, and she made tea without asking how I took it. And we sat for an hour and talked about nothing that was already something. Night 3 is the beginning of the archive. She's telling me she has been conducting this inventory since the beginning of the archive. I note this in the part of me that is past filing. She says, I'd like to stop thinking about asking and start asking. Then she says, stay past Sunday. The farmhouse silence receives this without comment. The refrigerator does not cycle. The night outside the kitchen windows is the specific dark of a rural English night in late spring, a darkness without texture or interruption, and in the warm circle of the pendant light, the only things that exist are the counter and the 2 mugs and the empty toast plate and her. She turns on her stool. It is a deliberate movement, not quick, not dramatic, the movement of someone who has decided and is executing the decision with the care she brings to load-bearing choices. She turns and she faces me, and she waits, and I turn on my stool and face her, and the knees that have been 2 inches apart are now touching. Not 2 inches, touching. The contact is light, the outside of her knee against the inside of mine through the soft, dark trousers, a contact that is barely weight and entirely deliberate, the final step of an approach that has taken 5 nights and has now arrived. And my body registers it before my mind does. Which is to say, my body has registered it before the completion of the turn and is already calculating the implications with an efficiency my mind is not going to match. She puts her hands at my knees. Both of them. Not gripping, not holding, just present. Both her palms resting at my knees through the cotton, the weight of them specific and even, and the warmth of them layered on top of the warmth that is already there from the contact of our knees. And I am sitting very still. I am sitting very still in the same way that I sit very still in the rain, waiting for the light over the water to do what it is going to do, except that the light has already done it, and I am not managing to be still in the same way. I am managing to be still in a different way, the way of a person whose body has made a series of assessments and found them consistent and is now waiting for the mind to catch up. The warmth of her palms at my knees does not move. The farmhouse silence is absolute. I can hear my own breath, which is not as controlled as I would prefer. I can hear the quality of her breath, which is slightly different from the controlled register and has been slightly different for perhaps 3 minutes, long enough that the difference is a fact and not a fluctuation. Past Sunday, I say. She looks at me. Not the counter. Me. The pendant light catches her at this angle. The jet black hair falling forward slightly, the open collar of the linen shirt, the visible line of the dark silk bralette where the collar parts, the 30-week shape, present and undisguised and entirely her own. And her dark eyes, that are the same eyes from across Juno's dinner table 2 Christmases ago, but are not the same look at all. Past Sunday, she says, not confirming the question, not repeating it back, just placing it again in the air between us, where it will stay. Her hands are still at my knees. I am aware, in the specific register that has been operating at the back of my throat for 5 nights, of the weight of both palms through the fabric. Not hot, not aggressive. Present, the specific quality of a hand that has decided to be where it is and is not deciding to be anywhere else. The warmth travels upward through the fabric in a way that has nothing to do with physics and everything to do with the body's tendency to register intention as heat. Then her right hand moves, slowly, from my knee, from the outside of my knee to the inside of it, a movement of perhaps 4 inches that takes a duration I could not accurately count because time is not operating at its standard rate in this kitchen at 12:47 in the morning on night 5 of 7. Her palm moves from the outside to the inside of my knee and stops. The sound that comes out of me is the smallest sound I have ever made and the most precise. Not a word, not even the shape of a word. A breath let out at a slightly different pressure than the breath before it. Audible only because the farmhouse is so completely silent that the difference in pressure is the loudest thing in the room. She holds her hand at the inside of my knee and does not move it. I look at her. She looks at me. The quality of the space between our faces is something I have no instrument to measure and no language, in this moment, to name accurately. What I know is that she is perhaps 8 inches away. What I know is that she has been 8 inches away from me before, in the kitchen, on night 3, passing the mug, and it did not produce this. The 8 inches is the same geometric distance. The 8 inches is not the same thing. Her thumb moves again. The pad of it, at the inside of my knee, a movement that is slow and deliberate and not ambiguous. A movement that catalogs its own intention in the specific pressure of its passage. And what happens in my chest when her thumb moves at the inside of my knee is not a metaphor and not an exaggeration. It is a physiological event in my sternum that arrives before I have processed the cause, which is what the body does when it has been patient for 5 nights and has reached the limit of its patience without having been told by the rest of me that it had a limit. I put my hand over hers, not instructing it, not stopping it. Just my palm over the back of her hand the way she covered my hand on her forearm the night before. The gesture given back, the covering quality, the warmth that says I know what this is and I am not removing myself from it. She looks at the joined hands. She looks at me. She says, I've been deciding whether to do that for 4 nights. The farmhouse is silent. My hands are at the counter edge and her hand is warm under mine at my knee, and her dark eyes are on my face with an expression that is the specific expression of someone who has released a load they have been carrying with structural precision for 4 nights and is feeling, for the first time, the difference between the weight and the absence of the weight. The pendant light is the only light in the world. I say, 4 nights is a long time to decide. She says, I wasn't deciding if I wanted to. I was deciding if I would. The difference between those 2 sentences is the entire interior architecture of the last 5 days, and I understand it immediately and completely. And it lands in me, the way the things that are true and important land, not in the analytical mind which has been fumbling its categories for 5 nights, but in the region below the sternum which has been keeping its own records and has been waiting for this particular entry. I say, and, she says, I would. My hands are at the counter edge. Her hand is warm under mine. The inside of my knee where her thumb was a moment ago is the specific temperature of a surface that has been touched with intention, and the absence of the motion is not absence. It is the warmth remaining, the warmth staying, the skin not yet willing to reclassify the location. She moves her hand from under mine. She picks up her mug. She looks at the counter with the load assessment posture, and I look at her profile in the warm pendant light. And the farmhouse is so quiet that I can hear the exact quality of her inhale. Longer than the previous one, slightly more structured, the control reasserting with the specific efficiency of someone who has released a precise amount and is now managing the edges of the release. She has released a precise amount, she is managing the edges. I find this, the management, the precision of how much she has allowed and how she is now holding the perimeter of the allowance. I find this more precise and more charged than the alternative would have been. The controlled release is its own kind of declaration. It costs more than collapse. The cost of it is visible. We finish our tea. We sit in the quiet farmhouse kitchen until almost 2, and the conversation that follows is the conversation of people who have said what needed to be said and are now inhabiting the space after the saying. It is not awkward. It is not performed. It is the specific kind of ease that only arrives on the other side of an honest exchange. The ease that is the opposite of distance, and I sit in it with the same quality of presence I have been practicing for 5 nights. She talks about the Northeast Project again. I talk about the Outer Hebrides. We do not talk about Sunday. The mug in my hands is warm. Her knee is against mine, still touching. Still that light, deliberate contact. The contact that arrived when she turned and has not been rescinded. The final step of 5 nights of incremental approach, now held in place, as if it has always been the natural geometry of 2 people on adjacent stools in a late-night kitchen. At just before 2, she shifts on her stool. The adjustment sound, the 30-week wait, the small involuntary thing, and this time she does not control it at all. She makes the sound and stays with it, and I hear it, and I do not do anything with it except receive it as the fact it is. A body managing itself in the presence of a person it has decided to manage itself in front of without performance. I look at her. She looks at me. She says, "I'm going to get up slowly." I say, "I know." She says, "You don't have to help." I say, "I know." And then, "I'm going to anyway." She looks at me for a moment, the assessment quality, the deciding quality, and then she nods. Once. The nod of someone who has received the offer and assessed the load and accepted it, which is the way she receives anything. I stand. I move from my stool and stand to her left, slightly behind, slightly close, in the position of someone who's available without being insistent, present without requiring the presence to be acknowledged. And she moves off the stool with the careful deliberateness of 30 weeks, and for a moment her balance redistributes and her hand finds my arm, not my hand, my arm, my forearm through the linen of the borrowed shirt. Her fingers at my forearm, warm through the fabric, the grip light and functional and lasting. Perhaps 3 seconds before she is steady and the grip releases. My forearm holds the warmth of her grip for a long time after. She stands. She's taller than me by 3 inches, which I have been aware of abstractly and am now aware of specifically. The angle of her face from here, the line of her jaw, the jet black hair falling forward from the slight disorder of the evening, the open collar of the linen shirt, the barely visible line of the dark silk bralette, the 30-week shape present and easy and her own. She looks down at me. There is a moment, 3-4 seconds, a duration that is beyond incidental, in which she is looking at me from her 3 inches above, and I am looking up at her, and neither of us is performing the neutrality of the glance. And whatever is in her expression in this moment is the most unguarded expression I have seen from her, which is to say it is still contained, still managed, but the management is thin here in a way it has not been in any of the previous 5 nights. The management is thin. I can see through it. She says, "Good night, Saskia." She says my name. She has said it before, practically, in passing, using it the way you use a name when you're directing something at a specific person. But she says it here differently, with a particular quality that I have no accurate vocabulary for and am not going to search for, because searching would require stepping back from the moment, and I am not going to do that. I say, "Good night." She turns and moves through the kitchen toward the corridor that leads to the east wing, and I stand at the counter and watch her go, and the kitchen is very quiet after, and the pendant light is still on, and the mug I have been using for 5 nights is still on the right-hand hook. I stand there for a while. Then I go upstairs. Night 6. I am aware, waking on the morning of Night 6's day, that the categories have restructured themselves without my participation. What happened at the counter on Night 5, the knees touching, her hands at my knees, her right hand moving to the inside of my knee, the sound I made, the conversation about 4 nights of deciding, does not require a category, because it is already a thing and not a potential thing. And the thing it is has a shape I can see clearly even before I come downstairs to the kitchen. Juno's house in the daytime is different from Juno's house at midnight. In the daytime, it is spacious and ordinary and full of the domestic evidence of two people giving the house its private week. The coffee cups drying by the sink, the jacket on the hook in the corridor, the east wing door slightly open in a way that it was not open on day one. I make coffee and eat toast standing at the counter, which is a different kind of counter in the morning light. And I take my camera out of the case for the first time in 6 days and clean the lens, which it does not need, and I am doing this when I hear her on the stairs. She comes into the kitchen in a dark, oversized linen shirt and dark, soft trousers, and her hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck. And she sees me at the counter with the lens cloth, and she says, "You're cleaning a clean lens." I say, "Occupational habit." She says, "You do it when you're processing something." She says this as an observation, neutral in the same register as the load assessment. I look at her. She's making coffee with the efficient precision of someone who makes coffee every day in this kitchen and knows exactly where everything is. And she says it without looking at me. And it is delivered as an observation and nothing else. And I file it in the category I have stopped mislabeling. She knows what she's saying. She's aware that she knows. I say, "How did you sleep?" She says, "Better than the previous 5 nights. You?" I say, "Same." She looks at me then, a brief look, the mug in both hands, the dark eyes with the thin management. She nods. We are not performing the ease between us. The ease is simply there, which is something that the ease of the previous 5 nights was building toward and has now arrived at. And it lives in the kitchen in the daylight hours as well as the midnight ones. And it is no less present for being in the daytime and no less specific. I go out in the afternoon with the camera. The farmland around the house has the specific quality of late May light in rural England, long, particular, horizontal. And I walk the field boundary and take approximately 40 frames that I know I will not use and approximately 3 that I will. And I stand at the edge of a field for a long time in the way I stand at the edge of anything when it is about to do something. I think about what she said. I wasn't deciding if I wanted to. I was deciding if I would. I think about the distinction. I think about what it costs to hold a want at the distance of a decision for 4 nights. I know this cost. I have been paying a version of it, a less precise version, a version that was not yet fully named, for 5 nights, and the cost is specific and bilateral, and it is not a cost I am interested in continuing to pay now that she has stated the terms. I go back to the house in the long late afternoon. She's in the sitting room with her feet up on the sofa and her laptop on her knees, reviewing the Northeast Project documents. I can see the structural drawings on the screen from where I stand in the doorway. And she looks up when I come in, and the look is the brief, easy look of 2 people who have been coexisting in a borrowed house for 6 days and have arrived, somewhere on the 5th night, at a coexistence that is also something else. "Any good?" she says. I say, "3 frames," she says. "Better than average." I sit in the armchair across from the sofa and take my own laptop out, and we spend the afternoon in the sitting room in the comfortable silence of 2 people who have independently arrived at the conclusion that the company of the other person requires less performance than its absence, and have acted on this conclusion by being simply in the same room. The afternoon carries into evening. I make dinner, something simple, whatever Juno has left in the kitchen, a soup that requires only the attention of occasional stirring, and Lena comes to the kitchen and stands at the counter while I stir and we talk in the way of the afternoon, easy, associative, and she sets the table with the 2-person precision she has applied to the midnight toast and which she applies now to the forks and the water glasses, and we eat, and the evening is unremarkable in every way except that it is entirely remarkable, and we both know it, and neither of us is performing the knowledge. After dinner, we do the dishes. This is an unremarkable domestic fact, and also not. We stand at the sink, her to my left, our shoulders perhaps 4 inches apart, and I wash and she dries in the specific arrangement of 2 people who have worked out the most efficient configuration without discussing it. And the pendant light above the counter is on and warm, and the kitchen smells of the soup and of cedar and cool linen at proximity, and the dish towel she's holding is making the small sound of cloth at work, and I'm keeping track of my breathing. She says, "You've been doing that for 10 minutes. I say, "Doing what?" she says, keeping your breathing even. I look at her. She's drying a bowl, not looking at me, and the corners of her mouth have made the small, contained adjustment that is her version of a smile. I say, "It requires some effort at this proximity." She looks at me then. The adjustment at the corners deepens slightly. Barely, precisely. She says nothing. She dries the bowl and sets it on the counter and picks up the next one. And the 4 inches between our shoulders is the most attended 4 inches in the room and has been for the last 10 minutes. I wash the last mug. We are in the sitting room by 8:30. The kitchen light left on, as it always is, as it has been every night I have been here. And she is on the sofa, with her feet up and a book she's not reading, and I am in the armchair, with a book I am also not reading, and the sitting room in the evening has the quality of the kitchen at midnight compressed into the daytime register. Warm, quiet, specifically two-person in its configuration. At some point after 9, she puts the unread book face down on the sofa arm and says, "Come here." The instruction is not elaborate. It is the instruction of someone who has issued instructions all day in a professional context and has not changed register. It is direct, minimal, no softening, and it lands in me with the same quality as every other direct, unadorned thing she has said. I close my book, I stand, I cross the sitting room, and she shifts her feet, and I sit at the end of the sofa, and she puts her feet in my lap, and this is an entirely ordinary domestic configuration, and also not at all what it is. And I sit with her feet in my lap and my hands resting on her ankles, and we are in the sitting room in the warm lamplight, and neither of us has mentioned Sunday. I can feel the warmth of her ankles under my hands. Not heat, warmth. The specific warmth of skin in a warm room, carried through the soft, dark trousers, transmitted to my palms, which are resting there with no particular motion, just present, the way her hands were present at my knees the night before. The warmth travels up through my palms and into my wrists in a way that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the accumulated weight of 6 days of incremental approach. We stay like this for the better part of an hour. I am aware, during this hour, of the quality of her breathing, even controlled, slightly different from the full control register, the difference I have learned to hear. I am aware of the occasional shift of her weight on the sofa, the 30-week adjustment, the sound of it, which she makes now without controlling, and I am aware that the making of it without controlling is directed at me, which is to say, it is allowed in my presence in a way it is probably not allowed in most presences, and I receive this with the stillness I have been practicing for 6 days. At just past 10, she says, "I should try to sleep." I say, "Okay." She says, "I probably won't." I say, "I know." A pause. Then she says, "I'll see you at the counter." This is not a question. It is a statement of what will happen. The architecture of what the house has become over 6 nights named directly, in her direct, unadorned register. I will see you at the counter. Night 6 is going to contain what night 6 is going to contain. And she has stated this in advance, which is its own kind of declaration. I say, "I'll put the kettle on." She looks at me. The thin management, the eyes, the small adjustment at the corners that is as close as she gets to the full expression of the thing she is managing. She gets up from the sofa with the careful deliberateness of 30 weeks, and I stand, and she does not need my arm this time, but she puts her hand on my shoulder briefly as she passes, the heel of her palm at the outside of my shoulder, warm, moving past in the passage. And the specific location of that warmth stays on the outside of my shoulder for a long time after her hand has left it. And I stand in the sitting room and do not immediately move. Because the warmth at the outside of my shoulder is a physical event that deserves a moment. It gets the moment. Then I go upstairs. Night 6. I am at the counter at 12:15. The kettle is on. The mug is on the right-hand hook. The toast is not yet made because I do not know her preferred second piece timing, and I have been learning this incrementally, and tonight I will learn it more specifically. The pendant light is on, and the kitchen is warm, and the farmhouse is silent, the complete rural silence of a property at the end of a long lane in the middle of fields. And I am sitting on my stool with my tea and my hands in my lap, and I am not pretending to myself that I am here for any reason other than the reason I am here. I am here because she said, "I will see you at the counter." I am here because the mug is on the hook, and because the specific warmth of her hand at my knee the night before has not left the inside of my knee even during the hours in between, and because she said I wasn't deciding if I wanted to. I was deciding if I would, and because whatever is in that sentence is something I have been carrying for 6 days in the region of my chest that keeps its own records. And the records have reached a volume and a clarity that the analytical mind cannot manage alone. I hear her on the stairs. The quality of her footfall on the farmhouse stairs, careful, deliberate, the weight redistribution of 30 weeks, and then the corridor, and then the kitchen doorway, and then she is in the room. She looks different on night 6 than she did on nights 1 through 5. Not different in the observable facts: the dark linen shirt, the dark soft trousers, the jet black hair down and slightly disordered, but different in the quality of her entrance, the quality of how she comes into the kitchen. She comes in without the architecture of managed arrival, without the component of careful neutrality that has been present in every previous entry. And what is present instead is something quieter and more direct, the quality of someone who has decided they are no longer performing the management of this particular room. She comes in. She sees me. She says, "You made tea." I say, "I said I would." She takes her mug from the left-hand hook and pours from the kettle and comes to her stool and sits. And the distance between our knees as she settles is the distance of last night, touching, the outside of her knee to the inside of mine, established immediately, without the 5 nights of incremental approach, because the approach has already happened, and this is the position that the approach arrived at. We sit. The toast is on the plate, the tea is in the mugs. The pendant light is warm above us, and the dark beyond it is complete. The farmhouse is silent. She says, "I've been thinking about what I'm going to be good at alone and what I'm going to need to ask for." She said this last night. She's saying it again, not as a repetition but as a continuation, the same sentence picked up from where it was set down, indicating that the thinking has continued through the day and the night and the afternoon in the sitting room and the dishes at the sink and the feet on my lap, and has arrived somewhere new. I say, "And?" She looks at the counter. She says, "I'm going to need someone to be present with me without requiring me to perform the presence. I'm good at most of what the plan requires. That's the part I don't know how to structure." She delivers this in the load assessment register, and it lands in me as the most precise and most private thing she has said in 6 nights. I say, "I'm good at that." She looks at me. "I know," she says. "That's why I'm telling you. The quality of the kitchen air has a specific weight at this moment. Not charged exactly, not the way it was charged on night 5 when her thumb moved at the inside of my knee. This is a different weight, the weight of something being handed over, a structural element being transferred from one person's care to another's. The weight of someone who has assessed the load requirements carefully and has decided, after 5 nights of assessment, that this specific load can be shared. I receive it the way she receives things, without ceremony, without performance. I say, "Stay past Sunday still stands?" She says, "It still stands." I say, "Then I'm not going anywhere." She looks at the counter, the small adjustment at the corners, the thin management, and behind it something that is not thin at all, something that is, I understand now, as large as 30 weeks and as specific as 1 mug on 1 hook and as long as 5 nights of deliberate, incremental approach. We sit in the silence. The refrigerator cycles. The pendant light is warm. The farmhouse is entirely dark outside its circle, and inside the circle there are 2 mugs and a toast plate and 2 women on adjacent stools with their knees touching and the week running out of days at the far end of Sunday, and neither of them has checked the return ticket. She shifts on the stool. The 30-week adjustment. She makes the sound and does not control it. Then she sets down her toast, and her hand is at my waist. It is not a question. It is not a precursor to a question. It is the action of someone who has been deciding for 4 nights and is now executing the decision, with the same care she brings to every load-bearing choice. The hand moving to my waist, sliding under the hem of the ivory linen shirt, her palm against bare skin, warm, flat, staying. The warmth of her palm against the skin at my waist is specific and total and moves from the surface of the contact inward in a single wave that reaches my sternum before I have processed what has happened. My hands find the counter edge. My throat moves. No sound. My throat moves without producing sound, which is its own kind of sound, the sound of something being held at the border of expression. My spine registers the warmth of her hand, the way a load-bearing wall registers a weight it was built to carry. Immediately, completely, the registration preceding the analysis by the full duration of a held breath. She does not move the hand. I do not move. The farmhouse is completely silent. She says, I've been deciding whether to do that for 4 nights, not asking if it was welcome, not asking if it was right, stating the duration of the decision, 4 nights, a specific interval, a load carried with precision for exactly that long, and now transferred to the place where it was always going to go. I look at her. She is looking at me. Not the counter, not the mug, me. And the management is not thin. The management is not present. What is present is the expression beneath it, which is the most unguarded expression I have seen from her face in 6 nights. And it is specific and particular and entirely hers. And it is looking at me from 8 inches away in the warm circle of the pendant light at 12:40 in the morning on night 6 of a week that runs out of days on Sunday. My hands are at the counter edge. I can feel the specific weight of her palm against my skin. I can feel the temperature of it, warmer than I expected. The warmth of someone who has been holding this decision for 4 nights and is feeling the release of the decision in the temperature of the hand. I can feel the particular flatness of the palm, the width of it, the way the heel of it rests against my hip. I can smell cedar and cool linen and the warmth underneath both of those, skin warm, the specific warmth of the midnight kitchen, and I can hear her breathing, slightly less controlled, the border between the registered shift and the full release, and I can hear my own breathing, which is not controlled at all. Her hand at my waist does not move. The absence of motion is its own event. She placed the hand and she is holding it, and the holding is a statement, not of possession, of intention, of the 4 nights of decision having arrived at this and being willing to let this be what it is without rushing past it. I understand this. The holding is the thing. The warmth, staying at the single location, the flat palm, the staying. This is the architecture of what she is saying, and she is saying it with the precision she applies to everything. I look at her for a long moment, then I move. I move from the counter edge. I stand from my stool, carefully, attentively, with the same care she uses to move from hers. And I step behind her, and I place both my hands at her shoulders, my hands at the outside of both her shoulders, through the linen, and my forehead against the back of her head. The black hair against my forehead, warm, soft, the slight disorder of it against my skin, and my hands at her shoulders, and the warmth of her back against the front of my chest at this proximity, the 30-week shape of her present and specific and entirely, emphatically real. I hold her, not performing a specific act, not moving toward the next thing. Holding the full weight of a hold, both hands present, my forehead against her hair, my breathing at the back of her neck. She stills. The stilling is total. Not the stilling of control, the stilling of a person who has reached the place they were moving toward and has stopped because they are there. And the arrival is so precisely what was needed that the body can be still without requiring anything else. She says, "This is what I needed to ask for." She says it quietly into the warm kitchen air, not to the counter and not to herself, but forward into the room, placing it in the air where the 5 nights of midnight company live. Then she says, "I've been asking for it for 5 nights by not going to bed." I hear this against the back of her head, my forehead resting against her hair, and I understand it completely and immediately, and in the understanding there is something that moves through my chest that is not a metaphor and not an exaggeration, a structural recalculation, the kind that happens when a load you have been distributing across multiple secondary supports is finally received by the element it was always meant for. And the redistribution is total and specific and changes the geometry of everything. She moves. She reaches back, her right hand leaving its position and moving back and to the side, finding one of my hands at her shoulder. She takes my hand. She brings it forward, slowly, around the front of her body, and she places it at the curve of her belly, flat-palmed, her both hands over mine. The warmth of the 30-week curve under my palm, not what I expected, which is to say I had not let myself form an expectation, and the reality of it is specific and warm and alive in a way that is distinct from any other warmth, a warmth with weight and continuity, the warmth of something that is always happening. She holds my hand there with both of hers. The exhale that comes from her when she does this. The exhale is the most unguarded sound she has made since I arrived at this farmhouse. Not the 30-week adjustment sounds, which are involuntary and controlled. This exhale is something she gives, not a sound she makes, but a sound she releases, long and quiet. The specific sound of a person setting down a weight they have been carrying with precision for a long time and feeling, for the first time, the difference between the carrying and the not carrying. My palm at the curve of her belly, her hands over mine, her exhale in the warm kitchen air. I press my mouth to the back of her neck, not moving, just holding. My mouth against the back of her neck, at the place where her hair parts, the skin there warm and specific against my lips. I stay there, her hair against my forehead, the warmth of the 30-week curve under my palm, her hands over mine, the gentle weight of them, the holding. I say it against her skin. I say, I was always going to stay past Sunday. She's still for a moment after I say it. The specific stillness of someone receiving a thing they have been carrying the hope of for a number of days. Then I feel her grip change. Her hands over mine, tightening slightly, not gripping, the specific pressure of a thing held rather than held onto. And I feel the quality of her second breath, which is even and quiet and completely without management. The pendant light is warm above the counter. The toast plate is there, and the 2 mugs are there, and the farmhouse is silent around us, the complete rural silence of late May. No wind, no traffic, the refrigerator not cycling, and my palm is at the warm curve of her belly, and her hands are over mine, and my forehead is against her hair, and my mouth is at the back of her neck, and the week has 4 more days in it, at least. 4 more days, at least. We stay like that for a long time. The kitchen holds us inside its warm circle, and the dark is complete beyond it, and neither of us moves toward anything else because nothing else is required. This is the specific thing that was required, and it is present, and it is enough. And the body knows when it has arrived and becomes still. Eventually she says, "Sit with me." I step back carefully. She turns on her stool, and I offer my hand, and she takes it and moves off the stool with the careful deliberateness of 30 weeks. And we are standing in the kitchen for a moment, her hand in mine. She does not release it, and then she leads me to the sitting room. The sitting room is dark, except for the kitchen light falling through the corridor, and she turns on the small lamp by the sofa, and the lamp makes a circle of warm light that is the sitting room version of the pendant light in the kitchen. And I understand that we have been moving between circles of warm light for 6 nights, and the circles have been getting smaller and more specific. She lies down on the wide sofa. It requires some management, the careful horizontal arrangement of 30 weeks, the redistribution of weight, the finding of the configuration that works, and I stand nearby, and she does not ask for help, and I do not offer it without being asked, and she finds the configuration and settles, and then she looks up at me. She says, "Here," and she touches the sofa arm near her head. I sit. She adjusts, and her head is in my lap, and the weight of it, specific, warm, the black hair spread against my leg, is a fact of the sitting room and a fact of the 6 nights, and I receive it with both hands, one of which goes to her hair, my hand in her hair. The quality of it, warm, loose, the slight disorder of 6 nights of sleep not quite achieved, and the weight of her head in my lap, and the lamp making its warm circle, and the kitchen light in the corridor, and the farmhouse completely silent around us. She takes my free hand. She lifts it, not my hand at her hair, the other, the one resting at the edge of the sofa, and she places it at the side of her belly, flat-palmed, the curve of the 30-week shape against my palm, and she holds it there with both her hands, the covering gesture, the warm weight of her hands over mine. She closes her eyes. The farmhouse is very quiet. The lamp is warm. Her breath is even and present and slightly slow, the breath of someone tipping toward sleep with the specific ease of a person who has set down what they were carrying. My hand at the curve of her belly, her hands over mine, her head in my lap. She falls asleep, holding my hand. I sit with it. The sitting room is warm and quiet, and the kitchen light is still on in the corridor, and my hand is at the side of her belly under her sleeping hands, and the night is the specific, complete dark of a rural property at 2 a.m. And I am not going anywhere, and Sunday is at the far end of the week, and the return ticket is in my camera bag, unlooked at, unrevised. I sit with all of this for a long time. I do not examine the return ticket in my mind. I sit with the weight of her head in my lap, and my palm at the warm curve under her hands, and the lamp making its circle, and the farmhouse holding its silence. And I am present, fully, specifically present, in the way that I have been practicing for 6 nights at a kitchen counter, and which I understand now I have been practicing for years before that. In the patience of waiting for light to do what it is always going to do. The light has done what it was always going to do. I sleep eventually. I do not mean to. I am sitting up with her head in my lap, which is not a configuration designed for sleep. But the warmth and the quiet and the weight of 6 accumulated nights arrive together, and I sleep, and when I wake, It is light. The early light of a late May morning coming through the sitting room curtains, which are not quite closed, a gap of perhaps 4 inches, letting the specific horizontal light of a rural English morning fall across the sofa, across her face, across my hands. Her hands are still over mine at the side of her belly. Even in sleep, she kept them there. I stay still. I look at the window. The light is moving slowly, as morning light does, the angle shifting by degrees, the gap in the curtain moving the light across the room in its patient horizontal way. My palm is warm under her sleeping hands. My other hand is still in her hair. I look at this room in this light for a long time. Then carefully, I move. I ease my hand from her hair. She does not wake, and I ease myself off the sofa in a sequence of small, careful movements, and I put a cushion where my lap was, and she does not wake, and I stand in the morning sitting room and look at her. The jet black hair spread on the cushion, the dark linen shirt, the 30-week shape easy in the horizontal position, her face in sleep, carrying no management at all, simply itself, and the morning light crossing it. I go to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. I take the 2 mugs, mine from the right-hand hook, hers from the left, and I set them on the counter. The tea takes the time it takes. The morning kitchen is different from the midnight kitchen, lighter, cooler, the wooden counter with the morning light coming through the east-facing window in a quality I have not seen from this counter before, and I stand in it and wait for the kettle. When the tea is made, I bring her mug back to the sitting room and set it on the table beside the sofa where she can reach it when she wakes. Then I come back to the kitchen with my own mug, and I stand at the counter. I look at the right-hand hook. The mug I have been using for 6 mornings, white with the chip at the base. On the right-hand hook, which is the hook closest to my stool, which is the hook where she placed it on night 3 without comment, and where I have returned it every morning since without comment, and which I understand now, standing in the morning light of day 7, is a claim made silently over 6 days. A small structural decision made once and maintained, the way decisions hold load. I look at the hook. I understand, in the quality of the morning light and the warmth of the mug in my hands and the sound of her sleeping in the next room, that this particular act has been a kind of declaration all along. Not a dramatic declaration, a domestic one, a small, specific one, the kind made without announcement and held in place by repetition. The mug on the hook, 2 pieces of toast, the right-hand hook, every morning. I look at it for a long time. Then I take a sip of my tea. The morning is early and specific and warm, and the kitchen is quiet, and in the sitting room her tea is cooling on the table beside the sofa. And Sunday is at the end of the week, and the return ticket is in my camera bag where I put it on Sunday afternoon when I arrived, and it has not been checked, and it is not going to be checked this morning. Not this morning.